Welcome, everyone. Good evening. I'm Sophia, founder of She Emerge. And here with me today is Sheila Gregoire, right? And so I would like for our guest speaker today to introduce herself and just give us a brief overview of her book. And I will open the floor to you, Sheila.
Okay, so yeah, this has a bit of a story behind it. But yes, I'm Sheila Gregoire, and I blog at bearmarriage.com. That's my website.
Mhm.
And I started blogging back in 2008. I was a mommy blogger, so I talked about parenting and housework and organizing. But the more I talked about sex, the more my traffic grew. And so I sort of became like this sex space online in the Christian world, which was
Okay.
weird, very weird. No one ever grows up thinking what I really want to do is be the Christian
Mhm.
sex lady, but that's kind of what I became. And so I wrote a number of big books on sex. I was talking about sex. I was doing conferences. But the one thing that I didn't do was read other Christian sex books or Christian marriage books because I was always afraid of plagiarizing. So, I
Ah,
went through this for years. And what we found is that the more we gave healthy information, the more
mhm,
people still had the same problems, and I couldn't figure out what the issue was. Here we are, we're teaching healthy stuff, but everyone's got this big roadblock. And then it was a Friday in January of 2019, so just 5 years ago.
mhm.
I was procrastinating. I had a migraine, and I was on Twitter, as it was called then, and people were debating whether they needed love or respect, and they were referring to Emerson Eckrich's book, Love and Respect. And I thought, I have that book, and I've never read it. This is a great way to procrastinate. So I went and got it, and I opened to the sex chapter, and I read, to my horror, things like, if your husband is typical, he has a need that you don't have.
Mhm.
And the need was for physical release. There was not a single word about intimacy. There was not a single word about a woman feeling pleasure too. It was just, you need to do this. And I called my team, and we were so upset because we thought, if this is what is being taught in the Christian world, no wonder people are still having issues. And so
Mhm.
from that grew into our huge research project that became the Great Sex Rescue. So we surveyed 20,000 women to see how evangelical messages on sex and marriage are affecting us and what we should be teaching instead. And that's what we've morphed into, is a research-based, evidence-based site online where we can look at what research actually says and how this lines up with scriptural principles.
Absolutely. I'm glad you were able to touch on that because as a researcher myself, I am, curious as to when you incorporated this idea of, just focusing on the great sex rescue and allowing yourself to do more of the research. Did you get a lot of pushback?
Well, I think the problem is that what's happened in the evangelical world up till now is that if you look at our best-selling books, right, like on marriage and sex, so you've got um, Sacred Marriage for Women Only, Meaning of Marriage,
Mhm.
Intended for Pleasure, like so many of them are primarily written by pastors
Yes.
and people who don't have qualifications in writing this stuff. They
Mm.
they weren't educated in relevant fields. Our books are written by 3 people, so we're a team of 3. I'm
Yes.
a sociologist, we have an epidemiologist, we have a psychologist, so we've got the whole gamut.
Mhm.
But a lot of people who have been writing our books are not qualified to write them, and they've been speaking basically from their own opinion as if
Mhm.
this is gospel truth. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to go deeper, because Jesus says in Matthew 7 that, if you're trying to figure out what teaching is true, if you're trying to figure out if someone is a false teacher, what do? You judge by the fruit.
Mhm.
Because a good tree can't bear bad fruit and a bad tree can't bear good fruit, and you can recognize things by their fruit. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're saying, okay, if the church is teaching X, then let's see what happens when people believe X, and let's
Mm.
look at the fruit. And that's what we're all about.
Oh, I love that. And so, as we know, sex is God given.
Mhm.
So, when we look at your book, and for those of you who have not yet, purchased the book, of course, it's The Great Sex Rescue, the
Mhm.
lies you've been taught, and how to recover from what God intended. What?
Mhm.
Can you
Mhm.
say more about the lies you've been taught? and how to recover what God intended. Because I think a lot of us, we sit at, we sit in this space and we wonder, okay, so based on what you're saying in the book, bridging the orgasm gap and all of that. So, what does this really mean? So, what are some of the things, what are some of the nuggets that
Mhm.
you should recover?
Yeah, so what we did was we tested, a whole bunch of different teachings in the evangelical church on sex and marriage, and we found 4 in particular that we look at in the Great Sex Rescue, which
Oh,
had really bad fruit. Okay,
mm,
so 4 teachings in particular that just resulted in worse sex, worse marriages, they were just bad all around. And
mhm,
these are very, very commonly taught things, and, I think if there's one teaching that kind of overcompasses everything, it's what Emerson Eggert said in Love and Respect, "If your husband is typical, he has a need you don't have." So it's
uh-huh,
that idea that sex is for men. It's something that men take and women give, as opposed to sex being something that you enjoy together that's for both of you.
mhm,
So that's sort of the big one, but the 4 things that come from that are all negative. First of all, a wife is obligated to give her husband sex when he wants it. So we
mhm,
call that the obligation sex message. Uh, a wife should have frequent sex with her husband to keep him from watching pornography. All men struggle with lust. It's every man's battle. And girls are the gatekeepers because boys will try to push girls' sexual boundaries. And so girls need to be the gatekeepers. And when you believe that as a teenager, all kinds of bad things happen.
mhm. Absolutely. And
Mhm.
so, what I also hear is a lot of emphasis in terms of what the wife should do. There's this idea of the wife has to, make sure she satisfies the husband.
Mhm.
So, where is it that the woman, gain a better understanding of what that context should look like?
Yeah, well, because that's if you think back to any sermon that you've ever heard about sex, and obviously there's some things that people can't say from the pulpit because there's kids in the church, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But the main message, whether it's in a sermon or whether it's in a book or whatever, is women, you just need to understand that God made men with these needs, and you were put here to meet these needs, and you don't have these needs. What you need is emotional connection, but you don't need sex. And that's what we hear over and over again. It's not true.
Mhm.
And but people will use the Bible and they'll distort the Bible. They'll take things out of context and they'll weaponize it to create some really harmful things. So they'll take verses like 1 Corinthians 7, right?
Yes.
Like um uh you know that that her body does not belong to
Mhm.
to her, but to her husband, and his body does not belong to him, but to her. And do not deprive each other except by mutual consent and for a time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer and fasting, but then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you. And so that whole idea of do not deprive has been used to tell women you can't say no. You can't say no while you're depriving him. And that's not what those verses are about at all.
Mhm.
And it's really hurt marriages, and that obligation sex message, that idea that a wife is obligated to give her husband sex if he wants it, um, that was one of the most harmful things that we looked at. About 39% of women reported believing that when they got married, and one of the interesting tidbits that we really wanted to look at for our survey is we wanted to get to the bottom of a very, very strange phenomenon, which is that evangelical women suffer from vaginismus at about 2.5 times the rate of the general population. And most people don't even know what this is, but it's a sexual pain disorder where the
Mhm.
muscles in the vaginal wall contract and become really tight and can't relax, which can make penetration really difficult, if not impossible. And we found an incidence rate of about 23%, which is
Wow, that's
huge.
interesting. Yes.
And it's been known for 50 years in the literature that most women suffering from vaginismus are conservative religious women. And in the more North American context, that tends to mean evangelical. Right? And so this is our problem, and no one's been able to figure out why. And so we were trying to figure it out. And I'll tell you that obligation sex message is the big driver for it. Because obligation sex says you don't matter. He has the right to use you however he wants. And when women believe that, their chance of experiencing vaginismus increases to almost the same statistical effect as if they had been abused, because our bodies interpret obligation as trauma.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
and this is what we're doing to ourselves.
Yeah. I am so glad you were able to expound on that, because one of the things that we came across in my class particular is on page 51, where it says the Bible does not assume that one spouse will be perpetually sexually deprived by
Mhm,
the other. Some people were just like, wow, what does that even mean? Because of what you mentioned earlier as well, the distorted messages that were,
mhm,
taught or learned, right,
mhm.
by some, basically in what you're saying. And I love that you also pinpointed First Corinthians 7, 8, 9,
Mhm.
where based on, from your book, Paul assumed that women would have passions. And then you went on to say sex is about both of you.
Yeah.
That was the aha moment for a lot of students.
Mhm. I know, because we've been taught that women aren't sexual, and it's absolutely crazy, but what we found is that the spouse that is the most likely to be deprived is not the man, it's the wife,
Mm,
because we have this huge orgasm gap in the
mhm.
Christian church where 95% of men almost always reach orgasm in a given sexual encounter, but the equivalent number for women is only 48. So that's a 47-point orgasm gap.
Yeah, that's a huge gap.
That is a huge gap. And so, and so if people are saying, "Hey, ladies, how come you're not having sex more?" It's like, "Well, give me something to want. Why should I want this?"
It's
For
the
a lot of
pressure.
women, it's not that great.
And so I like the fact that you were able to mention that, but also going back to something that really caught my attention in this chapter is that I know it takes 15 to 20 minutes of
Mhm,
foreplay for most women to get aroused.
mhm. Yep,
Right. That was
yep.
pretty interesting, right?
Well, I think it's even more fundamental than that. Like, when when we think about sex, like, what is the definition of sex?
Mhm,
If you ask the average person, "What is the definition?" They'll hem and they'll haw, and they'll describe something about penis into vagina, right?
mhm,
That's what we think sex is. And what we're trying to say in this book, in The Great Sex Rescue, is, okay, look, that's the definition of intercourse. That is not necessarily the definition of sex. Because when we looked at how women reach orgasm, very few women can reach orgasm through intercourse alone. And only about 40% can reach it even with foreplay, like through intercourse. Like, most women reach orgasm far more reliably in through other means. And
mhm.
so if we're saying that sex is simply penis and vagina, then that's leaving a lot of women out in the cold. And so we need to start expanding our definition, where sex is things that you do that bring each other pleasure in whatever means it is, but that each other needs to feel pleasure. And
It's not just one-sided.
yeah, and if you've spent your whole life thinking, "Okay, I can't have sex before I'm married, but then as soon as I'm married, I get to have sex," and you picture it as penis and vagina, and then penis and vagina happens and nothing, like, she's like, "Wow, is that all there is? Is that it?" Because you were never taught how her arousal works.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, and a lot of women can actually reach orgasm through intercourse. It's just you need a lot of warm up. But when you don't know that about her body, you figure she's just not sexual the way he is.
Mhm.
Right. And we women tend to internalize that message and think, well, I guess I'm just not, this just isn't for me.
Absolutely. And so to the woman, um, she's here or she may listen to this podcast later, and she may have had, terrible experiences. She may have been abused. And so now she's in the space where she's feeling stuck.
Hmm.
And then she comes across the Great Sex Rescue.
Hmm.
What should she expect?
You know, one of the funny things was that we thought we were writing this book for married Christian women. And we've had so many women who are divorced read it. We've had so many women who are single read it, and they've all said, like, and we've had so many men read it too. Um, that they just feel so free,
Mm.
and that, it's a relief, like a huge weight has been lifted off their shoulders. Because I think a lot of us have gone through life, and especially women who've been abused, where sex has been used as a weapon against you. And then when you go to church and you hear messages like, "You have to give him sex when he wants it," then it's like, my body, I don't have any autonomy.
Yes.
I don't have any autonomy. There's no way I can protect myself. I don't have the right to protect myself.
Mhm.
And not just that, but the men around me are gonna lust if they look at me because I'm a stumbling block,
Yes.
and all of these other messages. So it's like my body has betrayed me in so many ways, right? First, I was abused for whatever reason, and
Mhm.
now all these men are lusting after me, and I need to give my body to my husband, or else he's gonna watch porn, or he's gonna lust, or he's gonna have an affair. And sex has become something really ugly. And it's not just that it's ugly, it's that God made it that way for you.
Mhm.
Because if you don't give your husband this the right to use you how he wants, then he's gonna sin. And so God made you as a sin management tool for your husband.
Yes.
What a horrible, horrible message. What a huge burden to put on a woman. And what a lot of shame that she's carrying. And then not only do we tell them that, we then say, and by the way, your husband needs you to love it and he needs you to be excited about it. And don't you realize that God made sex as a gift? And I think a lot of us would just like to return it. We'd like to say, hey, God, this
Turn it to the
really,
center.
yeah, like this was not a good thing. And so to hear that, wait a minute, none of that was ever God's idea.
Mhm.
Those messages were distorted, and they were never from Jesus to begin with.
Absolutely not.
And Jesus actually is saying to you women, "You matter.
Yes.
You
Part.
matter."
Ooh, I love that. You
And
matter.
yeah, like, you're not just someone who's there who exists to be used. Like, you matter fundamentally.
Mhm.
And that's really the message of the book, and I think that's why people are finding it so freeing.
Oh, it is definitely freeing because, as you mentioned earlier, I want to highlight shame
Mhm.
when it comes to a woman in that space of shame, isolation, not feeling loved because of that shame that she's attaching to sex. And
Mhm.
to be able to understand that she matters, as
Mhm.
you mentioned. And this is not something that she is, expected to perform.
Mhm.
Because once it gets into that area of performance, then I believe that's where many are stuck as well.
Yeah, for sure. And
Mhm.
especially when we live in such a pornified society and where
Mhm.
so many men, they get married and they think, well, marriage is going to cure my porn habit.
Yeah,
And it doesn't, because porn and sex are polar opposites.
absolutely.
Sex
Absolutely.
says I want to know you, and
Yes.
porn says I want to use you.
Oh, wow. That was beautiful. Here Paula is in the audience and she's one of my students. Paula is
Mhm,
saying, I was just thinking about that. The book should be read by men also for
mhm.
them to know and understand. Most of them have also got a distorted message.
Yeah, yeah, and we've been so pleased with how many guys are reading it. Even if you go to Amazon right now and you look up The Great Sex Rescue, a lot of our reviews are written by men, and we've just heard some great stuff from women who are like, "Yeah, he finally gets it, and our
Mhm.
marriage has finally turned around," and that's just wonderful to hear.
Absolutely. So I love this idea of men, they are
Mhm,
now aware that this book is here, The Great Sex Rescue. And I believe as well that if men are utilizing the time to dive into this material, evidence based, of course, then
mhm.
the marriage will be better for it.
Yeah. Here, let me give you one stat that we thought was sort of interesting when it comes to guys. So, we did a follow-up survey after we did the survey of 20,000 women. We did a follow-up survey of 3,000 men. And so we asked men a lot of the very same questions that we asked women.
Right.
So, we asked women, "Does your husband do enough foreplay?" And we asked men, "Do you do enough foreplay?" Okay? And what we found is that in marriages where she frequently reaches orgasm, like 95% of men say, "Yes, I do," and about 90% of women say, "Yes, he does." So, yeah, good
Mhm.
kudos to you. Everyone gives you high marks. But in marriages where she doesn't reach orgasm,
Mhm.
72% of men still say they do enough foreplay,
Mm.
but so do 51% of women. So she's not reaching orgasm, and they're both agreeing he's doing enough. And I think what that's telling us is that both men and women have internalized this issue as they assume that she's not sexual, that she
Yes.
is somehow broken.
I love that you mentioned that. What does it even mean? She is not sexual. Could you say more about that?
Well, I think when she doesn't experience pleasure, the thought is this is something on her, like there's something wrong with her. As
Mhm.
opposed to, maybe we were just never taught how the sexual response cycle works. Maybe
Oh.
we were just never taught how arousal works for women.
Mm.
Maybe she's in a marriage where she feels emotionally disconnected from him and she can't
Yeah.
let go. Maybe there's been porn use in the marriage, like or maybe, and this is something that we really showed in the book, she just simply entered marriage with a lot of wrong beliefs. Because this is a big part of what we're trying to say in the book is that
Mhm.
yes, you can be in a marriage and and the husband is doing something wrong and obviously that's affecting the sex life. And for sure that happens. I'm not trying to minimize that. But
Mhm.
there's an awful lot of marriages in the Christian world where the husband isn't necessarily doing anything wrong, but because she grew up hearing all of this crap, when she gets married, she just has a very negative view of sex and she cannot feel connected to him sexually because sex is something which is seen as a threat to her autonomy.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so she can't relax. And so, like, we've got to address the negative teachings because this stuff hurts women, and a lot of men have no idea the stuff that women have been taught because women tend to read the marriage books. It's women's groups, women's Bible study groups that tend to do the marriage studies.
They
Like,
do
men
the
just
legwork.
haven't Men haven't been taught stuff. Like, one of the things that a lot of women know, if I say, "What's the 72-hour rule?" Most women will tell you what the 72-hour rule is, which is you have to have sex with your husband every 72 hours at least, or else he'll be tempted to stray or watch porn. And
Mhm.
this is in Every Man's Battle. It's in Power of a Praying Wife. It's in Act of Marriage. Um, it's in all kinds of different books, right? And we hear it in women's Bible studies. Most men don't know that's a thing that women hear.
They're normalizing that as well.
Right, and we heard from one couple when we were, doing our interviews for the Great Sex Rescue where they get married and she dutifully initiates sex every 72 hours, okay? So several years into their marriage, she's been initiating every 72 hours and she's just feeling very down because her husband never initiates, and so she just doesn't feel very desired, and so
Mhm.
she decided that she really needed to bring this up with him. So she said, "Honey, I just feel like you don't really find me that attractive or you're not really pursuing me and I feel like I'm doing all the work. Like, do you not want sex with me?" And he looked at her and he said, "Hon, I was just trying to keep up with you." And she said, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Well, you just have such a high sex drive, like, you want sex all the time." And she goes, "No, you do. You're the guy, like, you're supposed to want it every 3 days." And he goes, "No, I don't want it every 3 days."
That disconnect.
And she had no idea. So now they decided they would only ever initiate when one of them wanted it. So either
Mhm.
could initiate when you want it, and they've settled into, like, once or twice a week, right? But it's not every 72 hours like that anymore. But she had no idea that he just didn't want
No
sex that
clue.
often, and he's like, "Oh my goodness, I really gotta keep up with my wife." Yeah.
Here, we have another question, or a response. Did the surveys take into account women's age?
Yes, we did ask about age. Yeah. Mhm. So I can tell you some of the breakdowns. I'm not sure what in particular, we asked so many different things, but yes, we did look at that. Mhm.
Okay, great. And someone never heard about the 72 hours, as you
Well,
just
good for you. That's good. Yeah.
Wow, I'm a 31-year-old married man and I've never been taught this. Such good stuff. We as men need to understand our wives' sexual needs better.
Mhm. Yep.
Good. That's good. And so we've heard from, some of our viewers thinking that men should be able to glean a lot from, this
Mhm.
book as well, and the marriage would be better for it, right? And so even as we look at different things in terms of what the woman's expectations are, wouldn't you agree that some of the family of origin, lessons
Mhm.
that were perhaps learned behavior, because every behavior makes sense in context. So would you place a lot of emphasis on, the family of origin, multi-generational?
Yes. We didn't look at that much in our survey for the Great Sex Rescue. We did a lot in our follow-up surveys,
Oh,
especially
okay.
for our next book, She Deserves Better. So for that
Oh,
one, we surveyed 7,000 women to see how their experiences as teenagers in church affected them, or just teenagers in general. And so we were looking a lot at, how your parents taught you about puberty, what your rules were for dating, just a lot of those family stories, what your parents' marriage was like. And we definitely saw a lot of that, yes. But our specific focus, because I think there's been so much written on, attachment styles or
yes.
abuse in the past, or like a
Absolutely.
lot, a lot of family issues. What we really wanted to look at is could it be that some evangelical teachings actually cause us to, in essence, lose attachment from God
Mm.
and have sort of either insecure or avoidant attachment with God
Mhm.
because the stuff that we've been taught makes it sound like God is constantly wanting to put us in very dangerous situations and then blame us for it.
Mhm.
Um, so here's just one example. Shanti Feldon, who has written a lot of really big books in the marriage market, uh, she wrote one called For Young Women Only, which was directed at teen girls. And she surveyed boys, and I'm about to tell you a stat. I don't believe this stat. Her survey questions were really poorly written, so so this stat is not true. Okay, but here's
Okay.
what she said in the book: is that 82% of boys feel little ability or little responsibility to stop in a makeout situation, and so if you want to stop, it is safest to not even start. All
Hmm.
right. Now, to be clear, 100% of boys have both the ability and the responsibility to stop. So to tell a girl that a boy can't stop because he has little ability to stop, and so you are responsible to make sure it doesn't get that far, and so it's safest to not even start, essentially blames girls for their own date rape. And this is what we've done to a huge, huge generation, the millennials especially at the height of purity culture. Is we didn't teach what consent looked like. We didn't teach any of that. We just simply told girls, "Look, boys can't stop. Boys get to a point where they can't stop, and so you need to be the gatekeeper, and not just that, but you need to make sure you're not a stumbling block based on what you wear, because you can cause them to get out of control based on what you wear." Um,
Um,
the Secret Keeper Girl curriculum by Dana Gresh, which was written for 8 to 11-year-old girls,
yes, I have
um,
that.
yeah. So she talked about how she gave girls a modesty test. So you're supposed to
Yes.
raise your hands in the air, and if
Mhm.
your shirt comes up and your belly is bare, then that's bad because the sight of a belly can cause a man to be intoxicated. And she goes on to explain that being intoxicated is like being drunk or out of control. That book, again, was geared to 8 to 12-year-old girls. So we told 8-year-old girls that the sight of their belly can cause an adult man to get out of control.
Can you imagine the messages?
Like, that is horrifying. And this
Wow.
is what the church did. And so imagine, you're a little girl and you just want to love Jesus. And what is Jesus telling you? Well, you better not show your belly because you need to be kind to this poor adult man who may not be able to help but abuse you. And, no wonder a lot of women have some real faith issues and find that their relationship with God is so messed up because we've been taught that He blames us when we are assaulted or abused.
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
none of that is true. None of that is true.
Absolutely not. And so, from a therapeutic lens, I can see where a lot of women are feeling stuck because of those earlier messages,
Yeah.
right? And now they are in this space of, wow, I'm so disconnected from my body.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
Blaming the
how can you be connected to your body when your body puts you in danger? When your body has the ability to cause an adult man to abuse you if you're 8 years
Mhm.
old, when your body, and all of us as teenagers were catcalled or were, harassed,
Yeah.
at least if not abused. I mean, that's just it's scary. And when we feel like God is angry at us, so if a man lusts after us, somehow that's our fault. It's not his, it's ours. Because that's the way God made men. God made men, to be visually stimulated, to all of that stuff that we're taught. It's
Mhm.
not true, by the way. Men and women are equally visually stimulated. There's 2 meta-analyses show that in 2019, 2021, that there is no difference like that between the male and female brain. It's just that women have more arousal non-concordance, so we're not as in tune with our bodies and our bodies' physiological responses, but we are both equally visually stimulated. So
Mhm.
yeah. Hmm.
And so, would you say, based on the question in the chat, would you say that nowadays girls are modest when it comes to dressing?
Um, I think we're asking a lot of the wrong questions. Like, I just don't talk about modesty. I talk about what's appropriate. You know,
Mm.
when the Bible talks about modesty in First Timothy 2, it's referring to wealth. That passage is about not wearing gold jewelry, braided hair, expensive clothing, because, Paul was writing to Timothy in Ephesus, and the church at the time was made up of rich people and slaves and everybody in between. And the
Mhm.
idea was we can't have the poor feeling excluded. And so we have to, is that me? I don't hope not. I don't know what that was.
Mhm.
Okay, so we have to make sure that we're not dressing in such a way that makes people feel excluded.
Mm.
So that's what it was talking about. It wasn't talking about showing skin.
Mhm.
And, I think the best non-shaming way to talk about clothing with kids, both boys and girls, is just what is appropriate for this situation. And, as adults and the older that we get, as someone who's now in my 50s, you can look on teen, outfits and you can think that's outrageous. But once 70-80% of kids are wearing that, it's no longer outrageous to them.
Mhm.
Like men my age have a real issue with leggings and yoga pants, right? Everybody wears them. You gotta get over yourself,
Let's
right?
normalize
Because
that.
yeah, because once everyone is wearing it, it loses its shock value and, like, it is modest, it is appropriate. There
Mhm.
isn't anything objective that is wrong to wear, okay? Because it's all cultural.
Mhm.
Like when I go to Italy, and you go into cathedrals, you have to make sure your shoulders are covered because that's the sign of respect as a woman that your shoulders are covered. They couldn't care less about cleavage. Okay, cleavage is okay, just not shoulders, right? Like like it's all different worldwide. And
Mhm.
so we need to realize that it's not about specific items of clothing, it's whether or not you are being appropriate, respectful, and kind wherever you are. And that applies to both guys and girls, you know?
Mhm.
Nobody wants to see jeans hanging down your butt, right? So it applies to both girls and guys. Yeah.
And yes, Paula is saying she prefers the word appropriate as well.
Mhm.
I think, we have to consider cultural sensitivity as well, right? And
Mhm.
so that's going to be important. So as we talked about that, so we are looking at in terms of refrain only by mutual consent. For refraining can lead to temptation. I'm looking at 1 Corinthians 7:5. Do not deprive each other except by mutual consent. Where do you
Mhm.
see that is
Yeah, well, first of all, we have to come back to what does deprive mean? Like, what is it that we're not supposed to deprive each other of? And this goes back to the definition of sex, right? If
Mhm,
sex is just one-sided intercourse, then that verse would make no sense because how can she be being deprived of one-sided intercourse? It's not doing anything for her anyway. So
mhm,
so the thing that we are to be deprived of is something which is good for both of you. And if
mhm,
you look biblically, I would argue that it is something which is a deep knowing and a deep intimacy.
mhm.
Genesis 4 verse 1, Adam knew his wife Eve and they conceived a son. And the verb know there, it's the same verb that is used in the Psalms when David says, "Search me and know me, O God.
Oh me, oh God.
Know my inmost heart." And so
Oh,
it's this deep longing to be connected. So we know that sex is something which is intimate. We know it's pleasurable for both. We know it's mutual. So
mhm,
so, Paul is saying, "Look, don't deprive each other of this wonderful experience in marriage." He
mhm.
wasn't saying, "Don't deprive your husband of sexual release every time he wants it." How does that even make sense? Given everything that we know about Jesus, do we really think that what Jesus would be most concerned with is every time a man feels like, "Oh, I could really use sex right now," that he gets it right away?
Right.
That makes no
Exactly.
sense, right? Like, self-control is a fruit of the spirit. And so
Absolutely.
the thing that we're not supposed to deprive each other of is something which is mutual, intimate, pleasurable for both. Um, and you simply cannot deprive like, if you're talking about something which isn't good for her anyway, then
Mhm.
she's already being deprived, and this verse doesn't even apply.
Yeah.
But here's something else, I'll put some numbers to it. When this verse is often used towards women, right? So, you need to have more sex, otherwise you're depriving him. But
Mhm,
here's the thing, when women frequently reach orgasm, when there's high marital satisfaction, when she feels emotionally close during sex, when there's no porn use in the marriage, and when there's no sexual dysfunction, frequency takes care of itself and her desire takes care of itself.
mhm.
So if frequency is not the problem, frequency is a symptom.
We're stuck at that though.
We are.
Frequency. And if it's
Mhm.
not frequent, then there's a
Right.
problem.
But if she doesn't have desire, it's because something is wrong. And instead of telling her, well, you need to keep giving this to him, even if you aren't enjoying it, even if it's making you feel used, because 16% of women said their primary emotion after sex is feeling used. So for them, having sex makes them feel more distant, not closer.
Mhm.
Right. So sex is not automatically something which makes you connect at all.
So the
And
distancing versus the togetherness.
exactly. So if there's a reason, if she doesn't want sex, there's a reason. And let's be curious about that reason and let's figure it out together. As opposed to just telling her you need to have more sex,
Mhm.
because it's not gonna solve anything, and it's probably gonna make the problems worse.
So what would you say about sex versus intimacy then?
They aren't necessarily the same thing. Now they can be,
Mhm.
and, when you're in a healthy marriage, having more sex really contributes to that, and having more sex does make you feel emotionally connected, absolutely, but you have to be in a healthy marriage first, because sex in and of itself cannot create the healthy marriage.
Ah, I like that. That's very salient for us to know.
Mhm, mhm,
Know, in terms of the healthy space within your
mhm.
marriage versus the unhealthy space.
Yeah,
And when, a couple may come to me for premarital counseling or just regular counseling, and they may be navigating some of those challenges. Wife may say, well, we haven't had sex in months. We have not spoken consistently, and there's no way I can
mhm,
participate when we're
mhm.
not speaking.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely, because you need that emotional connection. And I should also say, it's not always that wife who has the lower sex drive either. We found that in 57% of couples, he has the higher sex drive, but in 19% she does. And then the rest, it's pretty much shared. So there isn't necessarily someone with the higher sex drive. So, it could be a situation where she's the one with the higher sex drive and he doesn't want sex. And like, let's get to the bottom of that too.
Mhm.
Let's figure out what the issues are around desire. Instead of treating desire as the problem, let's treat it as a cause for curiosity.
Mhm.
Mhm,
That's profound. So let's look at the desire
mhm.
versus frequency, as you
Yeah.
mentioned. So there's a
Mhm,
lot that's going on around that desire, frequency, initiation, all of what you mentioned earlier.
mhm.
Wow, that's very interesting. Now, do you tend to see a lot of what is happening versus, refraining, finding satisfaction when a couple may say, "Oh, let's explore finding satisfaction," or I don't see her as an attractive person anymore. What does that even mean?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, like, when people lose attraction for each other? Yeah, like, um, a lot of that is the emotional connection, you
Mhm.
know, combined with, when we do have more of a pornified style of relating. So,
Mm.
when we approach sex more as something which needs to be hot, it needs to be adventurous, we need to swing from the chandeliers, we need because you grew up on pornography and everything is
Yeah.
always different and it's busy and it's a
Mhm.
lot and it's using someone. It can be very easy to feel like your partner isn't adventurous enough, and we did find that when someone uses porn, they're more likely to be very dissatisfied with their sex life.
Absolutely.
So, because it distorts what sex is.
Mhm.
Whereas when sex truly flows, from your relationship, then that's what fuels desire, because desire what really, really fuels desire is vulnerability.
Yes.
When we can be vulnerable with each other, when we can be who we truly are, when we can let everything else, all the concerns from the world, fall away and just really be with our spouse and feel accepted and feel like they totally know us inside and out, then desire tends to build from that.
Mhm.
Because the root of desire is vulnerability. It's when we feel completely known, and that fuels that desire to be known at an even deeper level. But when we're not able to be vulnerable with each other, then the only thing that fuels desire is the pornified style of it. And that can't sustain a relationship because your spouse is never gonna live up to that.
So then there's that word, expectation.
Mhm.
Would you agree that also plays a role, a huge role in what women are navigating?
Oh, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, especially around, our body image, and we can do this to ourselves. It isn't even necessarily men doing this. It's, I just don't feel sexy right now, right? Like I had a baby 3 months ago. I still have a belly. It hasn't come back in.
Yeah,
I just don't feel sexy. And he
yeah,
can be like, "I totally think you're sexy," but it doesn't matter because she doesn't feel sexy because there are so many pressures put on women today,
yeah.
and increasingly on men, I would argue. I think that it is starting to
And
go,
as well.
yeah,
Yeah,
onto men as well. And so when we don't feel attractive, that can really hamper our sex drive too.
absolutely.
Mhm.
So then what would you say to someone listening? How are they able to recover parts of themselves that have been attached to the desire,
Mhm.
the expectation, the
Yeah,
frequency?
I know, I think a lot of us carry a lot of shame, feeling like we don't measure up, and the
Mhm.
more that we can learn how to get in touch with our bodies, how to love our bodies,
Yeah.
you know, doing yoga, doing stretching, just realize what your body can do. Um, dress your body well, don't hide your body, just
Mhm.
not I'm not even talking about doing anything necessarily sexual, but just even getting in touch with what does my body wanna eat right now?
Yeah.
Like, what would my body actually, benefit from, as opposed to just reaching for the chips, but, like, what do
Honestly,
I well, no, I actually really need some water, or, I actually really need some celery or vegetables or something, like listening to your body's cues. These are all things that we don't do very well because we've been taught not to listen to our bodies. And the more that you can listen to your body about non-sexual things, the more that you can enjoy your body in non-sexual ways, the easier it's gonna be for that desire to grow in a sexual way too.
Absolutely. And so I am just so intrigued by what you said just now. Listen to your body, right? Because a lot of times we're not able to listen to our bodies and be gentle with ourselves,
Mhm.
in that regard. And so I would say if we pause for a second, listen to what our bodies are communicating,
Mhm.
and then we'll be able to be one with ourselves as
Yeah.
well
Yeah.
and just
Oh, yeah,
be.
like, if I even think about my body right now, I realize, okay, I've been bouncing a bit. My daughter had a baby 2 days ago, so I've been holding a baby and walking with a baby, and my back's a little bit sore, like, I need to do some stretches,
Course.
I'm feeling like, okay, I haven't been at my exercise class in a while because 'cause I've been up here waiting for the baby, and, like, I can feel it,
Yeah,
right? But
absolutely.
how often do we ignore that? Or even our emotions are tend to be felt in our body, right? Like,
Mhm.
you get nervous, your stomach starts to churn, or you get super excited and you get butterflies, or you're heartbroken and your chest hurts and it's hard to breathe, or you're scared of something and your heart's really racing. These are all emotions that we feel in our bodies, and often when we turn those off, especially as teenagers or as children, when we're told that our emotions are a problem for our parents or for those around us, then we learn not to listen when our stomach is churning and not to pay attention when our heart is racing,
Yeah, absolutely.
and
As
we
you were
get
speaking,
disconnected. Yeah.
yeah, I thought
Mhm.
about when we're hungry, we
Mhm.
eat,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? And so that's also a skill,
Yeah.
listening to your body, right?
Mhm. But also recognizing what hunger feels like and what isn't hunger, because often we eat when it's not hunger. But
Yes.
it's boredom, or it's our stomach churning out of fear, and so, you eat because 'cause you're trying to distract yourself, so it's like, "Well, how can I honor my body better by entering into that fear or that nervousness and figure out where that's coming from and deal with it?" Because that's part of paying attention to your body too, and again, the more we can do this, the more we're authentic with ourselves, the easier it is to be authentic with your spouse, and then the more that desire builds, like, we're complete complicated person. You know? Yeah. Mhm, and God made us that way. So
Absolutely.
mhm.
So do you see love languages playing a role?
Oh gosh, there was a study out recently that showed that they weren't really good science. I'm not actually a big fan of the love languages. I
I
think that
know,
we
I read that.
I think we all need a healthy balance of connection, and we all feel connected in different ways.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
I think the idea of, "Well, I'm a physical touch person." Well, I mean, you might be, but you might also I think we all need quality time and words of affirmation and physical touch, and, we
mhm,
all need all of them. But I think what's at the root of each of them is intentionality, and I think that's what we need is the intentionality of
mhm,
someone saying, "Hey, I love you, and I wanna make sure that you know that, and I wanna
mhm,
make sure that I'm paying attention to you, and, hey, if I see that you're tired and stressed, I'm gonna rub your shoulders.
mhm.
If I see that you've been working for 3 hours at the desk drawer, I'm gonna make sure I get you a glass of water." Like, that's how you care for someone, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And we should just be doing that with our spouses. Just pay attention. Just pay
ab
attention.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Value also what they value,
Mhm.
that plays a huge role
Mhm.
into that space as well. So I like that idea where you're saying intentionality is key.
Mhm.
That would be that would be important for us to notate that intentionality, practicing loving kindness, being gentle with yourselves, just acknowledging some of the things that your spouse would perhaps prefer at that moment, and self-soothing
Mhm.
comes into play,
Mhm.
and so if
Yeah.
we're able to pay attention to some of those things, then like you said, marriages would be healthier
Yeah. Yeah.
and women would experience more of, what God intended for
Mhm.
them to experience.
Yeah. Yeah, because
Absolutely.
he intended passion. He wanted us to live passionate lives. He wanted us to
Singing from the chandelier.
Yeah, he wanted us to feel totally loved, and we can get there, but it has to start from an acknowledgement that we both matter, that
Yeah.
we both matter, and that this relationship is based on a deep emotional and spiritual connection. It's not just based on sex, and we gotta put things in the right order.
Yes, absolutely. So
Yeah.
Paula is saying, in your opinion, who sets the limits on what marriage can do sexually, the couple or the Bible?
I just I mean, I find that a difficult question because the Bible doesn't say a whole lot. The Bible gives us principles. And
Mhm,
so, it doesn't say anything about, is masturbation in marriage okay? Are sex toys in marriage okay? It's just not there, right? And so what I say is, okay, well, what does the Bible tell us? And the Bible tells us that, we're supposed to honor one another, that intimacy is the goal, that
mhm,
we need to be faithful to one another. And so as you're trying to figure out questions, I think an important question to ask is, does this enhance intimacy or does this detract from intimacy?
mm,
Like, is this something which is going to bring us together or is this something which isn't? And pressuring your partner for something you want that they don't is always going to detract from intimacy,
mhm.
right? Doing
Right.
something with a third partner, porn, whatever it might be, is always going to detract from intimacy, you know? But some things they might actually enhance, and there's not always the same answer for some people,
Mhm,
right? Like the same act with some people might really enhance, and with some people it might detract. If you've got someone who was sexually abused as a child and they have a real trigger, then some sexual acts would really detract from intimacy, whereas in other people it would enhance it. So I don't think that there's a direct line for everything. I think the real question is are we caring for one another? Are we loving one another as our own bodies? Are we honoring one another? Yeah.
absolutely. I love that because it speaks volume to how couples, showing up in different time of their marriages. Perhaps wife is not in the space of where husband is thinking she should be in terms of overall emotional health. And it
Mhm.
goes back to this idea of childhood. What did that look like? And how you are now, bringing that forward into your marriage, because that says a lot, you
Mhm.
know, when you are able to experience that connection, where you're able to experience that togetherness in a healthy space, considering each other, being intentional. I think that also cements the marriage in a healthy way.
Mhm.
And then there wouldn't be that much of a great pressure on frequency and, who's taking the initiative,
Yeah.
because there's also understanding,
Yeah. Yeah.
thoughtfulness. So as we wrap up, is there a last, you know, word that you would like to
Oh
share?
gosh, I'm trying to think of what we haven't said yet. We've covered so much in it.
I know.
Um, here's one example. So right now, my daughter, one of my daughters just gave birth a couple days ago, so I'm at her house. And it reminds me that one of the things we talked about a lot in the Great Sex Rescue, it was some of the appalling ways that our bestsellers have talked about the postpartum period for women. So
Yes.
you've just had a baby, and what do these bestsellers tell us we need to do? Um, Kevin Lehman in sheet music says that, you should give your husband a hand job when you're just postpartum and you can't do anything else. And so many of our books say this, right? So it's like she's she's just pushed a baby out, but the I think it was intended for pleasure said, but she has to make sure that he gets sexual release at the same level as he did before she had the baby. So
Again, the pressure.
even during those 6 weeks where she can't actually have sex, then she should be doing other sexual favors for him so that he still gets an orgasm. And how they think that that's from Jesus is beyond me.
Mm,
'Cause that sounds nothing like Jesus. Can you imagine Jesus saying to a woman who has just pushed a baby out, who is torn and bloody and who's,
A
her milk
huge
is just coming in
ordeal.
and she's not sleeping, and Jesus saying, "You need to make sure that he gets an orgasm."
Yeah.
That's not of God, and yet but this is what our book said,
Mhm.
and it needs to change. It needs to change.
Absolutely.
It's gotta stop because it's hurt too many people, and it looks nothing like God, and it's giving people such a distorted view of who God is.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And I think that's why your book is so it's so important to read because,
Yeah.
the distorted messages, all the different things that we've been taught,
Mhm.
there are so many nuggets from this. Um,
Mhm.
and you mentioned the turnoffs, exploring together and all of that. My students were like so excited to grab a hold of this book because it's not just something we've used in the semester. This is now a part of their collection.
Oh,
And
that's
they
amazing.
shared that they purchased an extra copy for family members. They're
Oh.
using this in their own faith communities and Bible studies, and I was just blown away. So when Casey, um, was able to get in touch with you, I was all for it. I'm like, yes, and
Mhm.
I was so happy that, some of my students are on and they're able to glean from this podcast. And also in the upcoming semester, I will be teaching another class, and we again will be using this book, The Great Sex Rescue. So, where can our audience find you on
Yeah,
the
so
social?
I'm at baremarriage.com,
Okay.
and you can find I have a Bare Marriage podcast every Thursday.
Mhm.
My social media links are at baremarriage.com. We've got lots of stuff there, our orgasm course, our libido course, our new book, She Deserves Better, all kinds of stuff, so you can check
Mhm.
me out there. Mm.
Awesome. And when are you expecting your next book?
So right now we're just finishing up our marriage book, and it'll be out in spring 2025, so it's based on our new matched pair survey
Mhm.
of married couples. Yeah.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Congratulations.
Thank
And
you.
once again, thank you so much for coming and just sharing all these different wealth of ideas and, just evidence-based research, right? And I'm
Mhm.
so happy that our community will be able to benefit from you just showing up in this space and sharing and taking the time out. We so, so, so appreciate you, Sheila.
Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much. It's been a great discussion.
Okay, same here. Thank you so much again.
You're welcome.
Be in touch with you soon. Okay. Have a good one.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Well, thanks everyone for joining. We certainly appreciate you taking the time out and to be a part of this podcast. And so I want to say perhaps you are showing up here for the very first time and you have not been able to see our other podcasts. Please take the time out to like, share, and subscribe. We're here as part of the She Emerged community, and we so, so, so love to encourage women, empower women to, glean all they can from the different things that we have been sharing. And at this time, I would like to invite you back, and perhaps you can share this podcast with a family member, with a friend, with a sister friend. So bye for now, guys. Again, like, share, and subscribe. Take care. Bye bye.